Blackmagic claim that their new PYXIS is the world's most riggable full-frame digital cinema camera. Now this is a really bold claim, and that's why in today's video I'm going to be breaking down 4 different cinema rigs for the PYXIS camera, talking about their pros and cons and how you can use them in a real working environment. And I will be linking each rig in the description below for you to use, view, and even copy. For us camera and cinema nerds, building a rig is incredibly fun, but it's also quite personal. Depending on how you shoot and what you shoot, building up a rig like this is very important. The cinema rig is your paintbrush on a blank canvas. And a massive thank you to Rig Designer for sponsoring today's video. So for these rigs that I'm about to show you, I'm not going to include audio because I feel like it would just be the same audio setup every single time, just an awkward mic putting onto the camera. So this is just exclusively visual. I'm not going to bother showing audio. Starting off with what I call the minimal rig. Now, it pretty much is what it says on the tin. It is a minimal rig, the least amount of equipment that's been attached to the camera. Let's start off with the top monitor. Throughout this video, replace this small 5-inch monitor with the PYXIS monitor. Obviously the PYXIS monitor has not been released yet. Blackmagic keep delaying the monitor. But throughout this video, just if I reference this monitor and if I reference camera controls for the PYXIS, just picture this monitor being the PYXIS monitor instead. So with this monitor, as you can see straight from the bat, the top of the rig doesn't have a handle. This is again just to keep it minimal and to keep this side grip as relevant as possible so that you can't just rely on this top grip. I've put a side handle with the Arri Rosetta plate, and as you can see, it just has that firm grip on the side of the monitor here. Moving on to the back of the camera and the power supply, we are just sticking with the Sony BPU battery. Of course, this is just to avoid having a very heavy V-Lock battery at the back. There's really not much to talk about with this rig because it is very, very minimal. The only attachments really are the Sony BPU battery at the back, the side handle, the side grip on the right hand side, and this top monitor here. This is pretty much as minimal as I could make this cinema rig. Quite frankly, it's actually one of my favorite rigs because it allows you to be very low profile and still capture some incredible shots using this rig. I personally would use this for personal work, travel videos, anything that requires you to be very quick, very fast, and very discreet as well, instead of having this big cinema rig. Moving on to our next rig. Now, what I call this is the professional events / weddings rig. This rig, basically, because you're in a professional event setting and you're getting paid to be there, you can be less discreet, and there's not that need to be discreet anymore. So what I've done, first of all, is added a matte box. We haven't got the bottom rails on the camera, we have just put the matte box on for now. This allows you to add certain Black Pro mist filters on this matte box and put a variable in ND. Now another thing that I've added, and I'm sure you've noticed, is the top handle here. Because we're now moving on to professional events, you are going to want to need a handle for the top of this rig, simply because it gives you more versatility, especially if you're carrying the camera to point A to point B. You just want that added grip. We are sticking with the Sony BPU battery at the back of the camera, simply to keep it light. We're still doing professional events using this rig, so we do still want to be lightweight. Having this monitor on the side allows you to quickly fold it outwards, change the settings if needed, because you're doing an event, you need to be quite quick with the settings, and then when you're done, you can just fold it in like that. If I turn it around like that, we now have a monitor that's folded, it's keeping nice and tight on the camera, and it's not sticking out. And then again, let's say the sun changes or something changes at the event, you can just quickly fold that monitor out, change the settings that you need, and close it back, tightening that. So you're keeping that rig nice and tight still, without that monitor sticking out. My next cinema rig is going to get a lot bigger and can get a little bit complicated in terms of all of the attachments and where they go, which is why I want to thank today's sponsor, Rig Designer. Thankfully, with Rig Designer, you can create, organize, and even share your own cinema rigs. Having a place where I can continuously go back and reference old rigs that I've built for specific jobs is incredibly useful. Rig Designer is completely free to sign up and use, and I have been genuinely using it myself to organize these different cinema rigs. If you're new to filmmaking, you can take inspiration from other creators' rigs on their community tab. Find a rig that you really like. You can in fact copy it or click purchase, which will take you straight to Amazon where the list of items is already set. You can even see the price of each rig and how they've designed it. So it gives you a rough estimate of how much it will cost you if you want to copy someone's rig. Rig Designer gives you the freedom and the options to buy an entire rig in its complete form with its full price budget, or you can look at the separate accessories that a creator has done. Rig Designer are building a rich community of creators with helpful posts, rig compatibility questions, and general conversation with creators. I really do encourage you to create a rig on Rig Designer because I'm genuinely curious to see how you guys rig up your cameras. If you do create a rig, make sure to share it in the comments below. Rig Designer is completely free and I do not get any added bonus for anyone who signs up. I just think community is important and this is a great way to connect with the community even more. And again, massive thank you to Rig Designer for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back into the bigger rigs. Now moving on to our next rig. This is moving away from videography work and this is moving more towards cinematography. And essentially the only differences that I've made is having this mount here for the matte box. When working with heavier anamorphic lenses or heavier cinema lenses in general, you're going to want to have a mount on your lens or matte box just to relieve some of that weight at the front of the lens. Another difference is having this, you can see here, having this arm that extends outwards, and obviously you can as well unscrew it and move it around to better suit you. You can even extend it out further like that. I think especially if you're using a shoulder rig for this run and gun cinema rig, you're going to want to need that that pivots around. So you can see the level of flexibility you have because of that arm. Instead of having that side handle locked on the side there, just gives you a little bit more control. For me, the biggest difference to this rig is moving away from the Sony BPU batteries and moving on to the much bigger but more powerful V-Lock batteries, which means you can keep the camera running for much longer. And when you're doing cinematography and you're shooting all day on a film, you don't want to keep stopping the momentum by switching the Sony BPU batteries. Now with this rig, because it is still technically a run and gun cinema rig, we are still sticking with the 5-inch PYXIS monitor. You don't have to be as fast because we're now talking cinematography, you're now on set, so people are a little bit more understanding of taking your time and changing settings and controlling the camera. And another big difference to this rig is adding the 15mm rods at the base of this camera. Now, because of these rods at the bottom, you can now equip and attach other things, such as the matte box bottom attachment and having this V-Lock at the back here. That's all possible because of these 15mm rods on both sides. I would say that this rig is probably the rig that I use the most because it's a good middle ground between having a big cinema rig that has everything that I need, whilst at the same time being quite run and gun and quick. Not overly quick, but still quite versatile in the way that you shoot. And finally, we have our last rig of today's video. I call this rig the Behemoth, or in other words, the full cinematography rig. And it does look like it's a bit overkill, and arguably maybe it is a bit overkill, especially at the level that I'm at. But this rig does have absolutely everything I will ever need for the shoot and for the camera. This is pretty much everything on there. And to be honest with you, I have shot sometimes with this rig and using this rig. I really do prefer it to the previous rig, simply because it has everything there and I like the ability to do whatever I need to do and have the maximum capabilities of this camera, because this camera does need all of these attachments to operate in its fullest capacity. Biggest attachment that I have added is the 7-inch monitor at the top here. SDI, because this camera does take 12G SDI. It can also take HDMI using the USB-C to HDMI adapter, but for some monitors it doesn't work, so keep that in mind, which is why I chose the 7-inch Atmos Shinobi 7-inch with the SDI in and SDI out. This SDI is only 3G, but the camera can output 12G, but 12G SDI monitors, especially 7-inch, are very, very expensive, so I did choose to go for the slightly cheaper option. It also works quite nicely as a director's monitor. If you have a wireless video transmitter on the camera, then you can have this as a nice director's monitor on a stand or using a handle. Another big difference and added adjustment to the Cinema Rig is the Tilter's mini follow focus. I really like the idea of, you know, when I pull focus forwards, the focus moves forwards down the frame. And if I pull focus backwards like this, then it brings the focus all the way back. Just giving, instead of focusing left and right like this, it just gives you focusing forward and backwards. Another adjustment to this rig is the Samsung's T7 SSD hard drive on top of the camera. I currently don't own any CF Express cards for internal recording to this camera because they are very expensive, and I already have a ton of external hard drives from using the Blackmagic pocket cameras. I've got tons and tons of memory and storage on this card, and on Blackmagic's website they do recommend this SSD as an external SSD. So far I have not had any problems. Another major difference with this Cinema Rig to the previous one is having both the V-Lock battery and the Sony BPU battery here. The reason that I have done this is because with SDI protocol, you can't just turn the camera off when your SDI is plugged in. Otherwise, you have the risk of bursting the SDI port on the back here. This camera only has one SDI, so if that SDI blows out, because of I didn't follow SDI protocol, that can be a real issue. The reason I have put two of these batteries is I can simply swap the battery out without having to take the SDI out, etc., and power down the camera, because once this battery is disconnected, the Sony BPU battery will continue to run the camera. The same can be said if something happened with a cable regarding this battery, or maybe this battery simply dies without me knowing it. This battery will continue to power the camera. I've also got this magic arm here. The reason I've got the magic arm here is because sometimes I don't want the monitor on the top handle like this all the time. I will put the monitor on this magic arm here just to give me a little bit more versatility in where this 7-inch monitor can go on the camera. You can put those NATO rails wherever you want on the camera, giving you more control where this big 7-inch monitor goes in relation to this Cinema Rig. You can also add a shoulder mount on this part of the camera here if you wish to have a shoulder mount out of the way of the tripod. Pros to this rig: one, it looks incredibly professional, and it is incredibly professional. Obviously it's very important like how you shoot and how good you are at shooting. I'm not saying that a big rig determines how good you are. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is just it gives the director a little bit of relief when they see something like this, especially if they're paying you, because this is a cinema camera. This looks like a cinema camera. This is not necessarily a run and gun videography camera, and I think a rig like this really shows that. I really do want to see how you guys rig your cameras up. So head over to Rig Designer and create your rig completely for free and share it to their community tab. But also share it in the comment section below of this video, because I do want to see all the creative ways you guys rig your cameras. And if you have any questions regarding the cinema rigs I've been talking about, please feel free to let me know in the comments, and I'll do my absolute best to answer them the best I can. Once again, a massive thank you to Rig Designer for sponsoring today's video, and thank you to all of you for your continuous support here on the YouTube channel. I think YouTube now wants you to click on one of these videos here, so I will see you in the next one.